The neighborhood had always looked perfect from the outside, rows of freshly painted houses, manicured lawns trimmed to the exact inch, and that artificial quiet that only existed in communities run by overbearing HOA boards. But behind that neat facade lived something darker, something that preyed on families who didn't bend to their every demand. My wife and I learned that the hard way. We had bought our home 2 years ago, full of hope, proud that we had finally found a place to raise our family. But we hadn't been there 6 months before the first letters started arriving. Notices about non-compliance. Fines for grass half an inch too tall. Warnings about leaving trash cans out for 10 minutes past pickup. It was harassment disguised as regulation, and my wife bore the brunt of it while I worked long shifts. She would open the mailbox, pull out yet another threatening letter with the HOA's letterhead, and her hands would tremble with frustration. At first, we played along. We trimmed, we painted, we paid fines that made no sense. But the more we complied, the bolder they became. When my wife finally told them to stop targeting us, when she dared to raise her voice in one of their smug HOA meetings, the game changed. It started with whispers of retaliation. Our security camera caught cars slowing down at night, headlights lingering on our driveway longer than necessary. We found nails scattered across the end of our property, puncturing our tires. A smear of paint appeared on our fence one morning, bright red, as though someone wanted to mark us. The HOA president, a man who strutted around in polo shirts and sunglasses like he owned the world, warned us directly. "Play nice, or things might get rough," he said with a smirk as my wife confronted him about the vandalism. She came home shaken, her voice barely above a whisper when she told me. Something inside me hardened that night. I wasn't the kind of man who went looking for fights, but I had spent years learning how to finish them. I knew the look of a coward trying to intimidate, and I knew he wasn't bluffing. Still, even I didn't expect him to send bikers to our door. It was a Friday evening, the kind of evening where the air carried the faint smell of barbecue from neighbors' yards, where the sun dipped low and painted the houses in gold. My wife was outside watering the flowers when the roar of engines shattered the peace. 3 motorcycles rolled down our street, their engines snarling like predators. They weren't weekend riders, they were the kind of men who wore leather vests covered in patches, their arms tattooed, their faces hard from a life on the edge. They stopped at our driveway, engines idling, their presence deliberate and heavy. One of them swung his leg over his bike and started walking toward her, his boots crunching on the pavement. "Hey, sweetheart," he called out, his voice dripping with menace. "Your husband home? HOA says you two been causing trouble." My wife froze, the hose still spraying water onto the grass, her heart hammering so loudly I could almost hear it from inside. She tried to step back, but another biker cut off her retreat with a laugh that made her stomach twist. "Don't be scared," he sneered, "we're just here to talk." Their kind of talk was never harmless. She called out my name, her voice breaking, and that sound snapped me into motion. I pushed open the door and stepped outside, letting the screen slam behind me. I didn't shout, didn't posture, didn't threaten. I just stood there at the top of the steps, my eyes fixed on the men who thought they could bring their intimidation to my home. For a moment, the engines quieted, the world seemed to hold its breath. The first biker squared his shoulders, trying to look larger than he was. "This ain't your business, pal. HOA just wants you to remember your place. Keep the lawn cut, keep your mouth shut." His friends chuckled, the sound ugly in the twilight. My wife moved closer to me, trembling, and I felt her hand clutch at my arm. That was the last straw. Something inside me, something I kept buried deep since my time overseas, came alive again. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I walked down the steps slowly, deliberately, my boots hitting the concrete with measured weight. "You made a mistake," I said quietly. The words were calm, almost gentle, but they carried a weight that made the smirk falter on the biker's face. The one who had spoken first tried to laugh it off. "Big man, huh? You think you scare us?" He moved forward, raising his chin in mock challenge. His hand twitched toward the chain hanging from his belt, but before he could blink, I closed the distance. My fist shot forward, fast and precise, connecting squarely with his chest and sending him staggering back onto the hood of his own bike. The breath left his lungs in a wheeze, and his friend's laughter died instantly. The second one cursed and lunged at me, swinging wild. But wild doesn't win fights. Training does. I stepped aside, grabbed his arm, twisted, and in seconds he was face down on the pavement, his wrist locked in my grip, screaming in pain. The third backed away, eyes darting between me and his struggling friend, uncertainty written all over his face. It hadn't taken 3 minutes. Less, maybe. The first biker was still gasping for air, the second was pleading, his voice cracking, and the third had dropped his chain altogether. My wife stood on the steps, wide-eyed, one hand over her mouth as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. I leaned down close to the men on the ground, my voice low enough that only he and his friends could hear. You tell your boss, the HOA president, that if he ever sends anyone to my home again, I won't be this gentle. I released his wrist, and he scrambled backward, clutching his arm like a child. The other two hurried to their bikes, their bravado gone, their engines roaring not with power but with desperation to flee. They didn't even look back as they tore down the street, tails between their legs. The silence afterward was almost deafening. My wife threw her arms around me, her body still trembling, but now it was from relief rather than fear. They were going to hurt me, she whispered. I held her tighter, my jaw clenched. Not while I'm here, I said. But I knew it wasn't over. Men like the HOA president didn't stop when intimidation failed, they doubled down. And if he wanted a war, he had just gotten one. The next day, I went to the HOA meeting uninvited. The president sat at the head of the long table, smug as ever, surrounded by his little circle of board members. The moment he saw me, his smile faltered. Word had already reached him, the bikers had told him what happened. I leaned forward on the table, close enough that he could see the steel in my eyes. Try it again, I said softly. See what happens. The room went silent, every board member shifting uncomfortably in their seats. He didn't answer, couldn't. And in that silence, something changed. The power shifted. From that day on, the letters stopped. The fines disappeared. Our mailbox held only mail, not threats. But the story of that night spread through the neighborhood, whispered over fences and around barbecues. People who had once bowed their heads in fear of the HOA now looked at me with something different in their eyes, respect, maybe even hope. They saw that bullies could be beaten, that intimidation could be answered with courage. And though the HOA still existed, its grip was weaker, its president more cautious. My wife and I had fought not just for our home, but for something bigger, the right to live without fear in a place we called ours. And if anyone ever forgot that lesson, if anyone ever dared to test us again, I was ready. Because 3 minutes was all it took to remind the world, no one threatens my family and walks away unscathed.